to the second episode of the Everyday Expertise podcast. I'm your host, Roland Martin, and I hope that today's conversation will expand your knowledge. Today I welcome Dr. Wendell Glick to the show. Wendell was my music teacher for 6 years, from grade 7 all the way through high school. Later, I got to sing in several choirs under him, and also taught with him for a few years. Over the last decade, I've enjoyed singing and listening to the various pieces that Wendell has composed and arranged. Wendell has spent many years studying music and honing his composing skills. In the following conversation, he shares significant points in his story and what he has learned along the way. I hope you will enjoy it and learn from his expertise. And there we are. We are live.
All right.
Thank you so much, Wendell, for agreeing to be on Everyday Expertise.
You're welcome. It's good to be in your house, or what was your house anyway.
Yeah, my old bedroom where I've set up my studio. So yes, it's good to be here. So tell me, what's keeping you busy currently?
Well, several things going on right now in terms of my work. The main thing that have been working on in the last while is an editing project for a friend's hymnal. So this is the grandson of the compiler of Zion's Praises, has been working on a hymnal for about 10 years.
I'm guessing that's a big job.
And it's a big job, right? So he hired me to do copy editing and also kind of troubleshooting. So starting in late March, early April, I started to go through the whole hymnal. Hundreds of songs, I play through them and look first of all for typos and things that might be just mistakes, but then also looking for difficult voice leading that could maybe be made better, just any trouble spots that might come up. And so then after I send the first draft back, then he responds with kind of assignments where I go through songs and it might be rearranging in terms of the song was written for unison congregation and organ or something, but he wants it in SATB. So I make it work for SATB. Or it might be a composer. Sometimes he has friends that have composed, conservative Anabaptist composers who may not have quite the training to make it sound good in certain spots. So troubleshooting and that kind of thing.
So, how many hymns are in the hymnal?
I never counted them because they come in subfolders. But I'm guessing probably 600 or 700.
Okay,
not sure.
Very good.
Yeah,
nice. Mm-hmm. So is it going to be all look exactly the same all the way through, or rather than just hymns being pasted in like some hymnals are?
Nice. Yeah. He has his own house style, and it's one of the things. It's definitely not Zion's Praises 2. Okay. It's a different feel than that, but it kind of springboards off the legacy of his grandfather Aaron.
Okay. Was Zion's Praises Anabaptist compiler? Okay.
Yeah. So Aaron Weaver was a teacher in I think Numidia Bible School, which was by the Eastern Pennsylvania Mennonite Church, and had a lot of anthems, things that he would collect here and there that he would do at Bible school, and so he wanted to compile a hymnal that would kind of serve, that could include some of these things. But in terms of quality, in terms of engraving and that sort of thing, Zion's Praises looks a little bit like a scrapbook. And so his grandson Jerome is definitely going to have a product that looks a lot cleaner. And I'm pretty excited about it because he's on the front edge in conservative Anabaptism as far as contemporary hymnody, modern hymns, and so there's a good selection of that in this hymnal. So I'm pretty excited to see it, and I'm happy that at least 3 of my original compositions and a lot of my hymn arrangements will be published in there, which is a first for me.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you've ever been in any other hymnals, so that is exciting.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done some editing work. There's actually 2 conservative Anabaptist hymnals in the pipe right now, at least 2. So the Eastern Mennonite Church and Nationwide and Washington Franklin Conference have been working for some time on a replacement to the church hymnal. which is older today than it has ever been. And so I've been doing some editing work for EPMC as well. And so that's that. The other thing keeping me busy, I had a commission recently for a friend commissioned to work for his cousin's wedding. And so I took several weeks off of the hymnal project to focus a little more on that and just wrapped that up last Friday.
Okay.
So that was fun.
Is that a single song?
Yeah,
or?
yeah, just about a 3-minute song on a text by Christina Rossetti.
Okay.
For a wedding gift for his friend. I had another commission lined up. It's actually in limbo right now because of COVID. That's for an orchestral piece for Anabaptist Orchestra Camp, which is scheduled to run in early August, but is a little tentative right now if they'll actually run it.
Yeah.
So the commission might be on hold till next year. We'll
okay.
see. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's some of those big events are getting canceled, it seems, for August.
Mm-hmm.
Faith Builders Teachers Week just got canceled, and so yeah, it'd be surprising if that happens. Did any of the music camps happen this year?
No, they all got canceled. This was my big year for music camps. I was scheduled to go to 4 of them, actually.
Oh,
the 3 Shenandoah permanent camps and Jamaica music camp.
Oh,
and,
right.
One by one, they all fell down. Ontario was canceled about 2 weeks ago.
Okay, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Are you pretty heavily involved in music camp, or do you just come in as an instructor?
I am in the Jamaica one. I'm more involved in the academic work, hiring or not hiring because we don't pay anybody, but finding teachers and curriculum and that sort of thing. But in Shenandoah, no, I'm just an instructor there. Except in Ontario, I serve as registrar, so I get everybody's applications. And right now, my big job is refunding a bunch of people because the camp just got canceled.
Yeah, it sounds like a fun job.
Yeah, it's not for the faint of heart, I suppose.
No kidding. Just on the Jamaica music camp, how long has that been running?
This would have been the 10th camp.
Okay.
So the first one was 2011. So that was pretty disappointing for Rachel. As she was prepared, it was going to be kind of a reunion one where we'd get students to come back and help with some songs and for the 10th year. But next year can still be the 10th year. It'll just be delayed a bit.
Right, yeah. So were you involved with that right from the beginning?
Yes.
Yeah. How did that start?
That started through a connection through Rachel's work.
Okay.
She in her cleaning work did work for Graham Gladwell, Graham and Joyce, who live in Waterloo or did live. I'm not sure. He's been in ill health. I'm not even sure how he's doing right now. They're the parents of Malcolm Gladwell, the author,
yes.
who is a graduate of EDSS. And so Malcolm's mother is Jamaican and his father is British. They live in Canada. And through a time when I'm not sure, one of them had surgery, hip replacement or something, I don't remember, knee. Rachel did some extra work for them just kind of as a friend, and as a gift to her, they offered her a trip to anywhere she wanted to go in the world with a friend. And she knew, so she knew about the Cranbrook Flower Forest, which is where Joyce Gladwell's twin sister Faith and her husband Ivan had 600 acres of flower forest. 660, I'm not sure, something with a 6. A lot of acres of flower forest.
This is in Jamaica.
In Jamaica.
Yeah.
So Rachel went down there. This was, 5 years into the Shenandoah camps. It was about 5 years into Mennonite Memorial Choir, and Rachel was there, and she's like, the only thing this flower forest is missing is some music.
Okay.
And so through coordination with the Lintons and then a non-denominational camping organization in Jamaica, which had a campsite on, I think their campsite was 6 acres, so that's where I get the 6. I don't know how big the flower forest was.
Gotcha.
We were able to partner with them. So they supply the logistics. They do they get the counselors, they get the cooks, they get the caretakers. They do all the recruiting. But Rachel's end of it and my end of it is to provide teaching staff for the classes and choirs and chapels. And also Rachel does a significant amount of fundraising to subsidize the cost of the camp for the Jamaican teenagers. So they're basically age 14 to 19, somewhere in that range. Camp size anywhere from around 30 to we've had mid 40s already there. Mid 20s to mid 40s. It varies a lot from year to year.
Okay. And you really enjoy that?
It's been a challenge.
Okay.
It's certainly not. People hear about music camp in Jamaica and they're like, "Oh, that must be amazing." Well, you don't really get to the beach very often.
Right.
You can see the ocean, but you don't really go there. It's in a jungle. It's in a side of a hill. Tin roofs make a challenge for rehearsals during the rain.
Wow.
We've had rehearsals where you just cancel, you just quit because you can't hear anymore. So there's challenges that we face there that we don't face in other camps, but the rewards are generally worth it. So
Nice.
yeah, do enjoy it. It's been a challenge as well in terms of family and how that all fits in, but we're finding a way.
Nice. Do you take your whole family with you when you go, or not every time?
We did the first year. We had 2 young boys. Dante wasn't a year old yet. The second year I went alone. We were there as a family in 2014. In 2017, I was there with the 2 boys. I haven't gone nearly every year.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Dwylan Byler from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and his wife Birdie have been most consistent in the staff there. And we've had various, teachers that come as well. But we were planning to go this year, and that didn't work out. So, of course, Lucas is very disappointed, but it'll come sometime. It'll be all right.
And do you do other teaching in North America throughout the year as well still, or are you pretty much done teaching at this point?
No, I do. Priority for our family is Calvary Bible School. So that's in Calico Rock, Arkansas, 6-week term from the middle of February to end of March. And I teach advanced rudiments of music. I teach basic rudiments of music and conduct the choir there. So that's something that we've been doing since, as a family. We missed 1 year, the year that Dante was sick. But we've been doing that since 2014 and really enjoy that. It's a good place to go in the winter. It can get cold there. They get some snow, but it's usually fairly nice. And way back in the sticks, 5 miles back a dirt road, and it's a good way for children to fill up their nature deficit if they have one. Nice. And so that's that. I've done Faith Builders winter term. Enjoy that. But that has been a little more sporadic than Calvary Bible School. Music camps, in terms of mobile camps, they have some mobile camps that aren't the permanent camps. So Shenandoah does, and I did a camp in Georgia. And but that is, of course, right now a little on hold. Everything that's going on with the music camps. So Bible school, music camps, those are the primary teaching things that I do.
Okay. Do you have anything that, any projects or hobbies or work that's outside of music that you're doing currently?
If I had another crack at life, I would probably get into architecture.
Yeah.
I find design. I've done in high school I did woodworking, so that was my dad we had a wood shop at home, and my grandpa was a woodworker, and both of them actually. One made church pews, but the other one was more into picnic tables and lawn furniture and that kind of thing. But so woodworking is an interest of mine. We have a shopsmith tool at home. It's like a 5-in-1 kind of thing. It has one motor, but you can make it a lathe, you can make it a drill press, you can make it a table saw, you can make it a band saw. It has a joiner, various things on it. So that's a little bit, but more in design. So when we lived here in Waterloo, did an addition on the house that I designed. I drew it on graph paper. And then my father-in-law, Wayne, took it to his drafting board and made it look nicer. And those were the prints that we used for the city to get our permit. And so designing that was pretty exciting. So now we have a house in Meadville, Pennsylvania. And I'm already, thinking about how to develop it, how to make it just a little more suitable. It doesn't have an office for me. Right now, my office is in the basement. And so, dreaming of that. It's 2-acre property on the side of a hill, a little creek. tree houses. I built a tree house here, and I'm planning to build another one in Meadville sometime.
I was gonna ask you if you have plans for your next tree.
Yeah, no, I do. And this one's going to be
excellent.
more complex. It's going to involve, like walkways between the trees and
Oh,
zip
very
line.
good.
And
So more than one tree.
Yeah, more than one tree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Will it be as high up as the other one was?
Probably not, although there will be, I mean, if my plans ever come to fruition, and Lucas is very skeptical, he doesn't think that they actually will, but we'll see. If it would ever happen, there would probably be like a crow's nest up one tree somewhere that would be at least that high, but
Okay.
probably not the whole house.
So
no.
you have trees to work with?
I do.
Okay.
It's not that great. I mean, we have at least an acre of woods, but it's obvious that, sometime in the last 50 years, somebody came and cut down the big trees and sold them.
Oh, that's too bad, yeah.
So it's very difficult to find trees more than 18 inches in diameter, and that's
Okay.
workable but marginal for a tree house.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And it takes a long time to get them to the place where they get bigger than
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Like one ring growth in a tree,
Yeah.
a year is pretty slow going for that. So
Yeah.
we'll see how that goes. But no, I love design, planning things, drawing things. For therapy, I get graph paper and my drafting ruler and a pencil and eraser, and I just do house plans. I imagine what this could be or that could be, and always with pencil and eraser, never with CAD.
Okay.
I've explored with CAD programs a bit, and they're just a pain. I mean, the learning curve, I don't want to invest in it, but also I love the kind of the tactile aspects of just working with pencil and eraser.
So it stifles creativity if you're on a computer? Or?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, because the learning curve gets in the way.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Yeah. If I would take the time to learn a software program, I would probably be all right.
So do you compose music too with the
I
pencil
don't.
and paper?
So
Oh, okay.
that's a really good question. So I grew up in a tradition where we had no musical instruments. We listened to instrumental music, but we didn't have any instruments. And so, I took my first real piano lesson when I was 27, 28 years old. But as a late teenager, early 20s, I was doing some choir work with our youth choir. And I remember, this dates me a little bit. I was shopping for music notation software, and I found this program called Music Time, which I think you could maybe still get. But anyway, the problem was it came on a CD-ROM, and I didn't have a computer with a CD player because that was like, way cutting edge. So I had to buy.
Okay, so this wasn't that we were past.
Oh no,
CDs.
nobody
This
had
was
them yet.
Yeah, okay.
I remember, I had to buy two things. I had to buy the disc to install in my computer, and I had to buy a sound card. Because my computer then would just make some beeps, and it could do a few pitches in beeps. So you'd be playing games, and it could beep this way and it could beep that way.
Right.
But it couldn't play an MP3 file.
Okay.
For example. Yep. So this is like late 90s.
Okay.
Mid to late 90s. So I bought a CD-ROM drive to install in my computer and a sound card so that I could use this music notation software. But then I went crazy. I would just enter songs in there. I would, go through a hymnal, and there would be a song that I would want to learn because I didn't have a keyboard, and because even if I had a keyboard, I wouldn't know how to use it. I would enter all of these songs turn them into MIDI files.
Like you would put each note in.
Put each note in.
Yeah.
And then play it back and sing along, and that was.
Oh, it was your way of learning.
It was my way of learning songs, right? Of hearing them. So that was actually kind of my introduction into a little more advanced chromatic harmony, going through hymnals and finding chords that I didn't know how they would sound. And so I would put the song in there, and then I would get context for them that way. The downside of that is that my early compositional work was almost entirely done at a computer. And that's not the traditional way. I mean, traditionally, composers will, use a piano. Okay. Often. I have a dream. I have a goal and it's one of my contemporary compositional heroes is Sir James Macmillan, a Scottish composer. Okay. From whom I've learned much. I actually met him. He was at Western University in the winter of 2016 when I was finishing my dissertation, and we had a workshop, a composer's workshop, and I was fortunate that he was able to look at my work and give me some feedback on that. Oh, wow. And that was pretty amazing. It was in that same weekend event that he gave a public lecture where he talked about his compositional method, which is composing in silence with pencil and paper. So not even a piano.
So he hears it in his head?
He hears it in his head.
Okay.
And composes that way. And of course I'm like, oh, I want to be like that. That's my goal. Well, it is my goal, but I'm pretty far from that right now. I have done composition in various ways, including, with pencil and note staff paper. I've done some at a piano, but primarily using computer work, including some of that is just notation software like Sibelius or Finale, but some of it using a MIDI sequencer like Logic, Pro Tools, those kinds of things where you're not as bound by the score, the bars. It's just more of a free kind of thing. What I've found helpful for me, I don't have, the big barrier for me compositionally, and I ascribe this, I think, to kind of coming to it late in my life. I mentioned starting piano late, and I studied piano. Why did I study piano? Because when I was an undergrad at Laurier, we had to pass a piano proficiency test.
Okay, so this is late 20s for you?
Yep. I was 28 years old, I believe, when I started my undergrad. I had done a semester of college in West Virginia when I lived there. That was in around 2002. And I was actually going into a music ed 2-year program. It was an associate degree at a satellite college of West Virginia University, Potomac State College, which was affectionately dubbed Pot State. And I showed up for orientation there, and big lecture hall, and this is like I'd never been to college in my life, and this was pretty exciting. And went to orientation, and they dismissed cohorts by discipline. These people go here, these people go here, and finally I was the only guy left in the room. There was nobody else there except like someone cleaning up the podium. And
Had you missed your?
Well, no.
Okay.
Then someone came to me and asked me what I was signed up for, and I said, well, I'm in the music ed program. They said, oh, well, that program's been canceled.
Oh no.
Permanently. And that's when I found out about it. And of course that was pretty disappointing. I ended up switching to just some general studies for one semester, but I said that's enough of that. I didn't. That's not why I'm here. I enjoyed it, but anyway, when I was 28, I started at Laurier, and I could transfer a few credits, but not very much.
Okay. Yeah.
All of that to say, piano proficiency, you had to pass the test in the first year, and so I took the test and kind of faked my way through some of it, and I did well enough that they said, we'll give you a retest. So if you didn't pass it, you were supposed to take a class.
Oh, that's what it was testing for. Okay.
Yeah, and I didn't want to take the class because I would rather take other things. So they said, well, we'll let you retest in a few months, if you want to. And so I found an instructor at the Beckett School of Music who used to work at Laurier and used to administer that test.
Oh.
And so I had him teach me to the test, and he did that, and I passed the test, and I never went back for any more lessons.
Okay, so that was the extent of your piano.
It was
playing.
A pragmatic purpose for that. Where I'm going with this is that I have, in terms of my compositional process, a big barrier for me is getting things from my ear onto paper because of the time lag. So music is a temporal art. It happens through time. It's not like a painting or a sculpture or something, that can be kind of frozen and you can choose how much time it takes. So I can hear music in my head. I can compose in my head. And actually, this isn't that amazing. Many people can do this. Children can do this. Right. It's not that incredible. But, I can hear orchestration. I can, imagine, a certain symphonic sound. And it's actually kind of good. I compose in my dreams sometimes. And sometimes I have a sense that it's actually not bad. It's pretty decent. Mm-hmm. But I can't capture it. I can't get it written down. So the process of taking a thought that is in my head and putting it on paper actually does violence to the thought. Right. So because it objectifies it, it abstracts it, it puts it in a dimension that where it's too cerebral, too scientific, and also I lose it, so but then I don't remember till I get, stuff entered in. I don't remember it anymore.
The process of starting to put it down changes
Right.
That's
right. That's
what's
right.
in your
So
head.
I don't know if it's at all like Schrodinger's cat or not, but the observation of the event changes the event, but in a
Interesting.
different way. I think that's a pretty flimsy analog, but that's all I've got.
Yeah.
So I have found helpful some way of recording what I'm going through, and this can be voice memos, on an iPod, of me singing. What I've also found helpful, even though my keyboard skills aren't that great, I do have some, and so I have a keyboard, a digital piano at home that has a MIDI function that I can plug into my computer via USB, and I will sometimes just open up a sequencer, a MIDI sequencer, and then I will hit record, and I will go to the piano, and I will just start playing. I will explore chord progressions. I will do some melodies, and all of this is being entered into the computer's MIDI data, which is then I can return to, delete the things that I don't like, and then kind of quantize and score things that are valuable. And that has been a way of kind of using technology to bridge that kind of gap between my brain and the paper that way.
Mm-hmm.
So will I ever compose in silence? I hope so. Pen and paper, or pencil and staff paper hasn't worked well for me. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. And do you think, well, often things come from practice. So do you
Mhm.
think you'd have to just practice it
Yeah.
to be able to do that?
I think so. But the thing that, and this is true for other skills as well, that, the medium of our work affects the product of our work.
That's true.
And I'm trying to remember. I really need to look this up because I heard it secondhand. I believe it was Nietzsche who developed late in his life a condition that made it very difficult for him to write freehand.
Okay.
And so he switched to some kind of early primitive typing device instead of writing freehand, and just made the observation that actually changes the output of his work. The style, the tone is affected by it. So if you're using notation software to compose, or if you're using MIDI sequencer to compose, or if you're using pencil and paper at a piano to compose, or pencil and paper in silence to compose, this is going to affect various aspects of your work. It's going to affect in terms of its kind of metric. So if you're using primarily notation software to compose, your music is going to tend toward being boxy, very square, very bar line heavy in terms of meter, that kind of thing. That's kind of a tendency that comes with it. If you're working, in notation software where you have, 4 staves, a soprano, alto, tenor, bass staff or something, and you're working in more complex divisi. If you're working in notation software, you're more likely to have, tenor one, and if you have parts of the choir that have different rhythms than another part of the choir, you're more likely to have that different rhythm entirely on a different clef. So tenors both have a rhythm that is the same as each other, but different than the bass and baritone. You're more likely to do that than to have baritone and tenor 2 have one rhythm and tenor 1 and bass 2 have another rhythm, because it's harder it requires more clicks. You have to select another layer. You have to select another voice. And I've seen it in my work, and I've seen it in work of my students as well, where I'm like, okay, so here you have this divisi, and here's a rhythm in this voice that if you would compose this voice all on its own and not be concerned about the others, I don't think you would choose that rhythm. The software and the practice of how you get around the software pushed you to an inferior rhythmic choice, and you have to be aware of that all the time. What is the technology that we're doing? How is it pulling me around? How is it affecting my work in ways that I'm not aware of? And that requires outside eyes looking in and saying, I think this is doing this to you, and then spend the rest of my life trying to mitigate that.
Yeah. I guess it would put a limitation or something, some kind of boundary in some ways that maybe we don't even think about on your on your work, and that maybe is what's directing the
Right.
the
Well,
process?
we follow the path of least resistance, and we do that in our workflow.
Yeah.
So if your workflow involves, layers of, or even the eye. So one of the things, I'm an engraver. I to some extent, I'm pretty good at editing music. I can see things that are wrong. I can see, collisions and typos and things. I mean, it's what a copy editor does. And
And you can see it just by looking at it. Is that?
yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I miss some things, but I can tell if a hyphen is at the wrong place, or if it, if there's, I'll be reading text sometimes, on someone on an email, and I can tell if they used one space after a period or two, and it bothers me if they're not consistent.
Don't you love finding a mistake in a published book or
That's
something
always
like
fun.
that? Yeah, I enjoy that too.
I enjoy that too. Of course, it always comes back to bite you, when people find mistakes in your own work.
Yeah,
then,
don't complain too much.
Which helps to keep you humble. But all of that to say that, kind of in in the process of editing, of doing the, actually I forget what I was, help me out here, where was I going with this?
You were talking about being able to edit things well, but I'm not sure.
Just before that.
I'm not. I can't remember exactly where you're going with it, but we're still talking about the mode or the method affecting how we work and
and the workflows and how it pushes us around. So we tend to. Yeah, I forget. I had a little missing link in here. Well, it wasn't missing, but now it is.
Sorry
where
about
I was
that.
going, but no, we can move along.
Actually, do you need water or anything? I brought a bottle along for you if you want it.
I am good for now.
Okay, perfect.
But it's good to know. Thank you.
Yep. As you were talking a little bit there, I was curious, going back to when you were younger. When did you develop a love for music, or realize that it was something you're good at, something that that maybe you could learn and develop? So is this something that's been from when you were a young child, or is it something that developed later in life?
So I have a few stories that I tell. Some of them I know from my dad telling me, but grew up in Lancaster County at Mine Road Amish Mennonite Church, and we had a tradition there of children singing after Sunday school. We would meet in the basement to sing, and sometimes we would sing in the auditorium upstairs for the parents.
Okay.
Just kind of once a month or so. I'm not sure how often it was. And so I really enjoyed that, and I would sing. Dad remembers I would sing pretty loud. I wasn't didn't have a good governor necessarily, but I always enjoyed singing. I mean, as far as I know. Dad remembers one man telling him that I would get over it, but I guess I didn't. I remember, in school, in 4th grade, I got to do a solo in the school picnic program. I sang the second verse of "I Am Not Descended of Monkeys." And I still know it by heart. I can sing you that solo now, but I won't. So I liked singing. I enjoyed singing. It was in a tradition where we had a small high school. The high school was maybe 15 students, but we had a choir that included grade 8, I think. So, we had 25, 30 people in the chorus when I was in grade 8, 9, 10. So music directors, significant in that time, Mike Gingrich and Matthew Raber, they were both from Ohio. They came in as singles to teach.
So they were your school teachers?
Mike was my grade 8 teacher, and chorus. So he, he was actually my, where I learned anything out of Star of Bethlehem, which is an old, kind of one of the horizontal hymnals. I don't know what the right word is. They're sort of in a...
They're longer than they are tall?
Yeah, exactly. And some great stuff out of there. And then in 9th and 10th grade, I think Matthew Raber was my choir director. So we had a good choir there. I mean, it wasn't good in terms of, you wouldn't want to buy a recording of it, not that kind. But it was inspiring, it was motivating, and I enjoyed it. Got into youth choir. Our youth group had a choir pretty much about every year, and that was how I got into choir directing. Then the youth would elect choir directors, and so first year I was an assistant director. I think I was 18 years old, And by 19, I was the main director, and I directed that youth chorus for about 5 years. I think it was 6 maybe. So yeah, kind of growing up, singing was always I'm fortunate that I was in a community and school and church environment where men sang. And so going through voice change was not problematic. I sang baritone actually in my 10th grade because my tenor wasn't functional then. But it was a fairly seamless transition into singing as an adult, and I don't take that lightly. Like that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about that, I think in talks that you've given, and I came across it in maybe it was actually a small write-up you did in the latest brochure that one of the music camps sent
newsletter
out. Yeah, just it seems like it's something that's very important to you, that everyone has the opportunity to sing and is encouraged to sing. So it's interesting to hear. So when did you decide to go further with it then, or were you starting to compose some music during that time as well?
So I was teaching school back at the school where I'd been a student. I started when I was 20. It's kind of hard to believe. I taught there 5 years.
Okay.
So I had the high school chorus there, and was also doing youth choir things. So some arranging was happening then. I didn't really do original composition that much. It would have been in 1996, when I was 20 years old. I was at Calvary Bible School for 9 weeks. I was there for second, third, and fourth terms, 3-week terms, and I took advanced rudiments of music there. And that was the first time I composed a song. And
it was part of the curriculum,
right?
Yeah,
it was part of what we did there, and I still have it. It's really, really bad, but I keep it as kind of a memento of.
Nice.
Everybody has to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And,
just as an aside, I signed up for music fundamentals one summer term with Lyle Stutzman, and it was far enough into the class that I couldn't drop out anymore. I realized that I would have to compose a song by the end of it. Yeah. So that was my one attempt at
right here.
I don't think so. He helped it make it somewhat better, but yeah, I realized how tough it was, I guess, is what I learned.
So that got me a little bit into composing, but it was in 1998 that I went to Faith Builders for summer term, and I took Theory 1 with Brandon.
Okay.
And back then they would run a class if there were 3 students. Excuse me. And I don't know, it depends today. Sometimes the classes are about that small, but it doesn't pay the school very well to run classes that small. But anyway, so the class was running, and there were 2 other students. And just before the summer term, one of the students, her sister, was in a bad car accident, and so she had some children at home, and so the student whose sister was in the accident, she canceled summer term completely to go help her sister's family. And so there were 2 of us, and one student was a local student. She had, I think, a part-time job. She was pretty busy, and about halfway through the term, she just dropped the course. And it was just me and Brandon, and so that was the way to take Theory 1. And I composed a song then too, and it was better than the one at Calvary Bible School because I had more training, but that kind of inspired me to go. And going back into youth choir, then I started composing more original works and doing some choral arrangements. But in a few years, I figured out that I had kind of hit a ceiling, that whatever I had learned, I was kind of maxed out. I was resorting to kind of pet chord progressions. I had, they were kind of neat, but I'd hit a wall there. So at the time I was also started dating and, trying to figure out what to do with my life in terms of family and school and that kind of thing. And so Janelle, who was my wife, it was very encouraging in terms of considering at least going back to school. Okay. And for me, undergrad was never about a job necessarily in music. And I know that, that's a consideration for conservative Anabaptists going to college. They're, you're going to hear it and you're like, well, can you make money with this? Is this something that, and that's fair. we want to be stewards of our resources. But the way I saw it, and I don't, this might come across, I hope this doesn't come across as arrogant, but it's just kind of how I felt then, was that I felt like I had skills in composition that were kind of buried in the ground, like the talent, and that they could serve the church, they could serve my community, they could be, if I would invest in them. Spend 3 or 4 years in college, learning about music, and then after that, whatever. Maybe I go back into construction. Maybe I go into school teaching. Maybe I'm, it doesn't matter. I'm not, this isn't for a job. Because actually, a job in music is kind of hard to do. I mean, I remember the orientation at Laurier, where the first year music students, there were about 75 of us, I think. We're all in one room, and the dean of music was there and basically just told us straight up that most of you aren't going to be able to get a job in music.
Encouraging way to start off.
Yeah. And they made the first year, like our cohort was much smaller in the second year. I mean, the first year is tough enough that some people just switch majors and or they drop out or whatever. I mean, that's true for other disciplines as well. I'm not trying to lift music up as like this very difficult thing. But I mean, there's a lot of people that go to school, go to university for music because they just don't know what else to do. They played trombone in high school and like, well, okay. And so they audition and they pass, but they don't know what they want to do, that kind of thing. Anyway, the market can't support a lot of full-time musicians. So, I mean, education certainly is the best chance of making money in music if you can be a teacher. But in terms of performance or, research, that kind of thing, it can be tough.
Yeah.
So, starting as an undergrad, my motivation was primarily I want to stir up the gift. I want to find out what's going on in that regard. So those were kind of the things that led up into, further education.
Mm-hmm. So when did you finish your undergrad then?
It took 4 years.
Okay. And now you were basically starting from scratch when you went to Laurier here in Waterloo.
Right.
Yeah.
So I had a semester at Potomac State, and I had figured out if I took the music ed class and I did some the music ed track, and if I did some summer classes with what the transfers was, I had figured out that I could do an undergrad at Laurier in 3 years. Okay. And so I went to see the dean about that, and he said, well, actually, I don't care. You can't do it in 3 years. We don't allow that. It has to be 4. Well, the reason is
you have to do the time.
You have to do the time, and it's because it's not only about the material or the content, it's about the culture. So the culture of going to concerts, to going to music concerts at school, the culture of the rigor of sustained, a studio time over 4 years. That was their policy, and yes, you can transfer a few credits, but it won't get you out any faster. And that was actually a significant meeting. I look back on it now because I couldn't take composition and do it in 3 years, even if they would have allowed it, because of the requirements for composition involved work that couldn't be done in the summer. It would have taken 4 years. But the music ed, I could have made it work if they would have let me. They didn't, and so that's when I said, well, I'd rather do composition.
So suddenly it was, since there wasn't anything
motivation.
Shorter,
there was no motivation to do anything. I mean, I was disincentivized to take music ed then because it was still taking me just as long. And because I was able to test out a piano proficiency, there was a Monday night composition class, or was it Wednesday night? Doesn't matter. First year composition. So first year composition at Laurier was open at that time to any student who wanted to take it kind of as an elective. But then into the second year, if you wanted to take composition, you had to have a portfolio and they had to approve you and that kind of thing. So I wasn't even sure that first year if I was going to stay in composition, but I knew if I wanted to be in composition that I'd better take these classes. So I did, and enjoyed them very much.
Nice.
And was definitely hooked at that point.
Okay.
So composition as a class is different than theory. We often conflate the two, and they have similarities. But theory is a looking back. It's a way of organizing the music of the past to inform in some ways composition going forward. But composition is more prescriptive, while theory is more descriptive. I mean,
Right.
that's a reductionist way of looking at it, but it still generally holds true.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was how things lined up for me to get into composition. And at that time, I know it's a little different now because of budget cuts and things, but the new music scene at Laurier was pretty impressive. We had new music concerts about every month where there were student compositions for the evening. So I had anything I wrote, we could find a way to get it performed.
Okay.
From organ solos to choir and orchestra pieces. And it was a lot of work. We had to get our performers, but that was kind of part of the rigor of it, is that they said, if you want to be a composer, you have to be able to do the work. You have to be able to get performers. You have to be able to line it up. You have to show up for rehearsal. You have to.
Yeah.
And so we did that. And that was something that I didn't find at U of T or Western, as in quite the same way as was at Laurier in the 2006, 2007, 2008, was the pretty incredible opportunities for student compositions. And actually, one thing as well is that Laurier did not have, and still does not have, significant music graduate school. At that time, the only graduate degree in music was music therapy, a master's. They now have a master's in community education, or community music, not education. But so that meant, when you were fourth year undergrad in composition, you were at the top of the pile.
Okay.
Like there were, and so money could get, put into things at an undergrad level that at a bigger university might be more into the graduate program.
Interesting. So you maybe had some opportunities at Laurier that you wouldn't have had if
I think so.
At another school.
I think so. And other schools did new music concerts, don't get me wrong. But in terms of the push to make sure your music gets performed, if you're going to write it, you better program it. And then just the opportunities to do it, consistent, regular opportunities for new music programs, was pretty exciting back in those days when, like I said, when they had the money for it. Things have changed a lot in the last decade.
So I remember being in high school when you were my music teacher. Mm-hmm. I think you invited some of us to, or at least I heard about it, a fairly large piece that you had composed. Mm-hmm. That I think it was like a 30-minute piece or something like that with a full orchestra. Mm-hmm. Was that close to the end of your time? Was that your final project or something like that?
That was my fourth year. I mean, you could call it a grad project. Maybe it wasn't. Like the program required us to do something like that, but many students did. They would kind of have a bigger work in their fourth year. So I would have started on that already in my third year, and that was it was 25, 30 minutes. I forget exactly how long. Writings of Menno Simons in the original Dutch.
Yes,
which was a challenge for the choir because it's 16th century Dutch, not contemporary Dutch. So I had to find a professor at University of Waterloo is where I went to try to read the Gothic script from Menno Simons' original. And there were some words he didn't know, but he could get most of it. So then I recorded him reading it and then gave the recordings to the choir members, and they would listen to that. And it was a piece of work. I really haven't done anything quite that monumental in terms of performance. I mean, my dissertation was more work, but that hasn't been performed in completeness.
Okay. Yeah. Has that ever been performed again, or was it just that one time?
Just one time.
Yeah. Do you think it ever will again, or is it kind of a project that happens once? No,
that's a good question. I mean, there's definitely, in the process of composition, the pedagogical process of learning, you're always moving to the next thing. So you're not really looking back that much. And sometimes there's pieces often there's pieces as a student that, you write and you perform and you're like, well, that was good for where I was then, for its time. It doesn't really represent me now. But actually, there's a lot of strength I felt like there was a lot of strength in that Menno Simons piece. And I've considered, and I actually started on it once a few years ago, trying to come up with making it work in English.
Okay.
Because it is something that, Mennonite traditions and the wider Mennonite culture, I think Menno singers or something, that would be of interest, I think, if it wouldn't be so difficult to get the text.
Yeah.
So I'm considering, sometimes I keep thinking about that. I really need to find a good English setting of that and promote that, but I don't know if that'll ever happen.
Okay. Would it be a lot of work to
set
it to or
I
change
mean,
it to
I know
English?
there are translations in English of Menno Simon's works, but that doesn't mean it's going to have the mood or the tone that fits the music.
So you might have to
that
really do significant changes to the music as well.
Yes, and that's then it just starts to get, and then it's scope creep. Like, okay, so I just wanted to change the words, but now I'm starting to change the music here. Well, there's themes, there's motifs, there's adjustments that just start to kind of permeate the thing, and it's eventually you're like, well, I'm just gonna move along.
Yeah. Plus, since it's more than 10 years past, would you find yourself saying, "Oh, I wanted this. I could make this better."
Exactly.
And
No, that's part of it too. Is and there's just parts of it that I really like. There's other parts of it that I wouldn't mind if they weren't there at all.
Okay.
And it would be difficult for me. So basically, you're faced with kind of an ethical. I mean, it's not ethical, but it's a dilemma of sorts. Do I be true to who I was then and preserve that, or do I be true to who I am now? Which isn't who I'm going to be in 10 years.
Yeah.
So, how many versions of this thing do I want? The 90s version, not 90s, but anyway, the 2010s, the 20s, the 30s, and so forth.
Mm-hmm. So, going back to your schooling, did you go right into grad school from your undergrad? Okay.
Mm-hmm. And kind of the motivation for that is a bit unusual. So, when I moved I mentioned we were dating, and Janelle encouraged me to go back to school, which I did in West Virginia for that one semester. But at that point, we're looking at getting married and thinking about, strategies for a young couple starting a new life together and starting university for me. And we felt like it would make the most sense if we would live either in her community or my community, which at that point was West Virginia, Slanesville. But not like a third community university somewhere, so we wouldn't
gotcha.
Go to Pennsylvania to university or
Washington State or something like that,
or wherever. So at that point, I was living in Hampshire County. The closest 4-year colleges were in Virginia, so they were out of state. They were exorbitantly expensive for out of state. Janelle lived in Elmira, 20 minutes from U of W and Laurier,
right.
and tuition was much more reasonable. So that was actually the significant motivator in starting our life here in Waterloo.
Okay.
Was for me to go to school. So I moved to Canada because of university, and then we could be, in Janelle's church community where people knew us, or so it felt like there was a grounding and accountability that we could have either in my community or hers, and it made much more fiscal sense to move here. So I immigrated to Canada in 2003 and became a permanent resident in 2004, which allowed me to get local tuition.
Nice.
So I started into fall of 2004. I started, and like I said, I didn't start as an undergrad to get a job in music, although I was open to it. At that point, so this is 2004, at that point, Yuri Sharp had a long tenure at SMBI, but it was clear that, he wouldn't be there too much longer,
right?
In terms of his age and those sorts of things. And so, I thought, well, that would be kind of a fun job to have, work at SMBI and take Yuri's place. There would be other opportunities like that, but I didn't know what they were. So I didn't have plans to move back to the U.S., but I didn't have plans to stay in Canada when I was done my undergraduate.
Okay.
So it was actually then the fall of 2006 when I was in third year with the deacon ordination at Countryside, and that was obviously a significant time in my life. I look back on it and see a lot of how that affected the path that I took from there. So, one day I'm, and that was not on my radar. I wasn't thinking about it. I wasn't even at the first preordination service meeting because I had class.
You said that was 06.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't remember that it was that soon after you got married.
Yeah.
Okay.
3 years.
Yeah.
So, and I wasn't a member at Countryside very long. And, the tradition I grew up in, you had to be a member for a while at a church before they would consider ordaining you. And I didn't even really check to find out how long people here would wait. Apparently not that
No,
long.
not long.
So that's okay. There were various parts of the process where I kind of came in with my, more beachy Amish understanding of how ordinations work, and didn't really understand the conservative Mennonite approach as well. And I look back on that. In this particular context, so one Sunday I'm not even on the ordination radar in my mind. The next Sunday I'm ordained, and so Monday morning I cut class. I didn't cut class very often, but Monday morning after the ordination I did. I stayed home. And, trying to figure out what does this mean, because obviously this is going to tie me geographically to a physical location. If I'm going to be a deacon at Countryside, I'm going to have to live, reasonably close. So this, all of a sudden, what appeared at that point was that my options for a job after university particularly in music, just got really small.
And you were still thinking directly after undergrad at this point?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So by then I was thinking, it would be nice to work at SMBI, or it would be nice to do that kind of thing. So it's Monday morning after the ordination. I'm like, well, my life is sort of deer in the headlights. What do I want to do with my life? And what's around here in music that I could do with my life? And so the only thing that at that point that that looked attractive to me was to teach at university. And so that was the first time I got serious about school in terms of career. Was like, I that was kind of a epiphany for me. I know I want to be in music. I know I would like to do this. I mean, I was open earlier to, going back to construction or teaching or whatever, but no, I want to be in music. By this point in my, my third year of undergrad, that was, becoming clear to me. So I remember that morning just kind of going online and finding out what are the grad programs within reasonable or unreasonable driving distance of here. And it's basically U of T and Western.
Okay.
And so I applied for master's programs. I mean, not that fall, but within the next year, I was applying for master's programs at U of T and Western, and was accepted to both. I went to U of T because it was Toronto. It was like, kind of a heady space, and the commute was horrible. I was there 2 years, and I drove my car once. The rest was train, bus, which made it more manageable. I mean, it was...
You could work on the way?
I could work.
Yeah. Were you going every day?
No, it was probably 3 times a week
that
I would do that. But it took a long time. It would easily need to figure, door to door, more than 2 hours, till I would hop on my bike and bike down to Kitchener and get on the bus and Greyhound to Union, and then the subway up, or I would take GO Train. Not GO Train. This was Via Rail. This was before.
Was GO Train not going then?
Nope.
That's too bad.
GO Train. They started like a couple years after I was done my undergrad, so I didn't get the benefit of that. That would have been nice.
Yeah.
Even though they're slow, it's a mess.
A lot of stops.
Slow.
Yeah.
Just like the tracks aren't in good shape, and
I see.
And there's other, rights of way and various things with other trains, and all of that to say that it's fair to say that my single biggest impetus for going to graduate school was my ordination.
Okay.
And that had to do with what could I do, where could I get a job doing, what I love, and that's going to require that. So going to graduate school was about a job for me. I had planned, when I'm writing out my grant applications and everything for funding for grad school, I'm talking about how I want to be a professor at an Ontario university. So 2 years in Toronto with my master's there, and then...
Were you still doing composition?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And so the thing about it is, this is true for other disciplines as well. The longer you're in school studying something, the more you learn about less. So, when I was an undergrad, I studied theory, I studied history, I studied vocal performance, I studied some electives. I took German, I took astronomy, I took micro and macroeconomics, and people thought I was crazy because it was an elective, but it fit my schedule really well.
Nice.
And I'm glad I did. I learned some good things about that. Go to grad school, and now it's just composition.
Okay.
There's no electives. There's here's what you have to do. And so the further you get into a program, in terms of degrees, the narrower you get more and more focused on one thing until you get to your dissertation, and it's like just one sharp point kind of thing. Which is, I guess, why it's a terminal degree, because to go beyond that would be like reach negative space or something. I don't know. It's not a bad thing, but it does mean that people have a wrong impression of, for example, people with graduate degrees, and think that they're well educated, and they're not. They're necessarily.
They're well educated on their specific topic.
They're narrowly educated often.
Mm-hmm.
It's why actually a lot of professors aren't actually good teachers. They haven't really studied pedagogy. I never studied pedagogy. I went to Faith Builders summer terms, and I wanted to take physics and I took, I don't know what courses I took, but I didn't take principles of teaching. I should have. I was a teacher. But I just wanted content stuff.
Okay. And
there are professors out there. They're just not really good teachers. They're really good at like their narrow field. And again, I should be careful here. There are some academics with a wide understanding of things. But for the most part, the reason they're in their job and the reason they got their job is because they know a lot about one thing or two things or something like that. So I look at the the contemporary farmer, for example, as being kind of the epitome of the well-educated man or woman, because you have to know about so many things. You have to know about all the things in terms of animal husbandry and crops and soil. You have these guys are welders, they're framers, they're electricians, they have
meteorologists.
To know. Yeah. They're just so many things. Just in terms of health, of medicine, so that's a broad education right there. Thinking about career then, being a university professor, that was again, my motivation for graduate school. And by the time I got done my master's, I, looking into going on from there, it was a matter of, if you get into the program, you get paid to go to school. And I could be like, well, I could stop with my master's and then I would need to get and think about, my job from there. There'd be some opportunities to teach in university with just a master's degree. There certainly are. Actually, the chairman of my examination committee at my master's defense, Gary Kalesha, at the University of Toronto, actually doesn't even have a master's degree.
Oh, wow.
So composition is a field where you either do the work or you don't. And he did the work, and he was good at what he did.
He had compositions to show for
right.
it.
Yeah, and he had a successful career in that. But it was kind of fascinating that the chair of my master's examination didn't have a master's degree. So going on for me was like, well, why would you go on? Well, it's fun and I get paid to do it. And so that was kind of going on from there. But the longer I was in graduate school, the less attractive the dream of being a professor became.
Interesting.
Yeah. So kind of the seminal moment for me, the pivotal moment for me, where things started to shift was, I think, the fall of 2013. I was in my third year at Western in the doctoral program there, and I was teaching a course at Western. This was Fundamentals of Music.
Is this one of the first year undergrad?
This was actually a course for non-music students.
Oh,
so it was an elective course. So I had students from journalism. I had some pre-med students. I had, just students from kind of all over the university that wanted to take a music elective.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a good class. I enjoyed it. I had some great students. I had some real not great students. But, kind of just going through. So I taught at University of Toronto in Scarborough. I did their concert choir one year when their director was on sabbatical. I applied for the job there and got that. And that was rewarding. It was hard work. I enjoyed that. It was a terrible commute. Well, it was far. Scarborough's east of Toronto. Yeah.
Oh, right.
But the timing was good that I could drive up in the afternoon and home in the evening, and mostly missed rush hour. But the trains were awful. It would take. I took public transit home from the University of Toronto at Scarborough one time, which involved getting on a bus and then getting onto the subway extension, which isn't the subway, and then the subway. And anyway, it took me 3 hours door to door. And I decided after that I'm going to drive.
Yeah.
But so we have, I'm teaching this class, and I had taught some other things. I had done some sight singing tutorials and some theory tutorials and various things that I had done there at Western and a little bit at U of T. And it was about that time then that the next winter that I went back to Calvary Bible School for the first time. So I had been there as a single. I was dean and teacher in 2002. That was the last I'd been there. So 12 years later, I go back with my family.
Okay. And
I loved it. I loved the students were eager. They were honest for the most part. They had good intentions. I mean, just the fact that you can have a teacher's study there, and it's the middle of the night, and all the teachers, their computers are just on their desk, and they're all in bed, and the door is not locked, and or throughout the day, it's never locked. It's like this culture of trust, and there's so many things built into our culture that we just kind of take for granted. The university setting, you don't leave your laptop on a library table if you go into the stacks. I mean, I did sometimes when I just thought I would be really fast, but I mean, they disappear. Stuff leaves. The whole culture in university, and I loved being a student at university, and I enjoyed parts of teaching at university. I enjoyed some of it. But I did not enjoy the politics of it. I didn't enjoy the culture of cheating, of dishonesty, of so when you produce a syllabus and half your syllabus is the academic code of misconduct and all the lines of things that students have to do if they're sick to prove that they're sick, the doctor's note, who gets this, who gets that, plagiarism, how you check, what the penalties are, it just you die a little every day.
Okay.
From that.
Were you dealing with that a lot?
Not a lot, but some.
Okay. Yeah. It does come up.
Yeah, it does. It does come up. It was more lying. When I taught the choir at Scarborough, there was an attendance policy, and but people would cut class just because that's what they do. But then they would just lie to you about. I mean, you didn't really know for sure, but you got a good sense of it sometimes. But what can you do? Like, you don't want to. When a professor has to become a court of law.
Yeah.
It just kind of takes the joy out of it. And don't get me wrong, I had some just amazing students at university. I enjoyed them so much. I had one pre-med student, just a delight to teach. He was eager, he was interested. He actually holds the Guinness World Record for the loudest tongue click. And he was a little embarrassed about that, but anyway. So there's just beautiful people there. I don't want to paint a picture of university is just a place where everybody is cheating and lying and stealing and that kind of thing. But it exists. The culture is there, and I think it was kind of the juxtaposition of that, kind of coming through that as the instructor of record at Western, and then the very next winter, like a few months later, going to Arkansas, teaching at Calvary Bible School. And don't get me wrong either. There are students at Calvary Bible School who plagiarize. There are students there, and you know who you are. No, you don't. Who are not honest. Mm-hmm. So it's a human condition. But there are things within the culture that are built in that it was so much more rewarding. It was so much more life-giving as a teacher for me to spend my energies in a situation like that. Also, I discovered something about myself, and that is that I don't like teaching long terms, like semesters. I like to
okay.
teach, like, that's what I love about music camps is they're like 10 days a week.
Right.
And like you get the students and you work hard and you're like, oh, your lifeblood flows out and you give a concert at the end and then you go home.
Mhm.
And then, I love that.
Okay.
That's kind of my wheelhouse in terms of how I like to teach, because I don't like to teach that much. I teach because it pays better than composition.
Okay.
But I don't really actually enjoy teaching that much. And if I could make money in composition, I would cut it out of teaching time if I could. But the semester thing. So going to a short term at Calvary Bible School, Faith Builders winter term. I've done some summer terms there. The music camps, a week long. That's perfect for me. Like 6 weeks is about the max that I want to do. So it was kind of then in the last few years that I figured out, being a professor at university, that could be good. There would be some things that would be great about it, but I basically, when I came to the end of my studies, by the time I got to the end, our family had started getting into, annual traditions of Calvary Bible School and music camps and those sorts of things. And looking at a tenure track position at university, you're looking at a lot of hard work. You're looking at a lot of hours. I was looking at my boys, what age they are, and thinking, if I go through a 5-6 year tenure track of working overtime, I'm going to come out the other side, and will I know them? It's possible. There are ways to do it, and there are men and women who do it really well. But I also saw, throughout, in my professors, in my advisors, in people that I worked with at university, just kind of a trail of tears, which is in terms of failed relationships, of broken marriages, of lost children. But that's true anywhere. So, I mean, you can't, just point at university and say, if you want to be a university professor, you better watch out because you're going to lose your children. Well, that happens to anybody. Right. So I need to be honest about that. All of that, though, was that we were kind of in a place where I had found something rewarding that I could do, that I cared about, that I loved. It wasn't full time. It was, intermittent throughout the years. Money was a question. Are we going to make enough money? But there were ways that it could come together. But it came kind of to the end, and I kind of had to decide if I want to be like putting out applications for tenure track positions at universities, and if I would get hired, which is not easy to do, but it's possible. If I would get hired, that pretty much means giving up music camps, giving up Bible schools, because it's a full-time job. It's spring, summer, fall, winter. There's work to do, and I wasn't prepared to do that. It felt like the opportunity cost was too high, so I came out the other end of it, kind of looking around at the culture that formed me, and saying, if they're going to give me opportunities to work, and if they're going to, I felt like my music was valued, like it was given more than a fair chance, then I'll keep working for them. And by working for them, I mean, doing work in this area. And so far, I don't regret that at all. Again, I enjoy being on a university campus. I find it to be kind of heady, and if I do my life again, I would probably do the same thing. But I didn't end up where I thought I would, but I think I'm glad.
So how far into your doctoral studies did you kind of firmly decide that, I'm not going to be a university professor? Or was it kind of a long process?
No, it was I don't know how much I knew it was happening.
Oh, yeah.
And there are a few things I can point back to and say that, this was, looking back, this was something, negative that kind of turned me away, in spite of this positive thing that might have brought me in. But I didn't know even at the very end. You know what? Just after I graduated, full-time position came up at Grable here in Waterloo for a theory instructor. Now, I'm not a theory guy in terms of I don't have the keyboard skills and even the knowledge of repertoire, to be a theory guy. My training was in composition, so it wasn't a perfect fit. It wasn't even necessarily an imperfect fit, but I did have the qualifications for the job. I mean, if I had been the only one that applied, I probably would have got it. Anyway, I didn't get the job, and that was a bit of an epiphany right there. It was like when I found out that I didn't get the job, and I got a sense of relief.
Oh,
a little bit of disappointment, right? Okay, of course it's disappointing. You don't want me for this job. I wasn't surprised. I was glad I had went through the process of applying, and it's not easy. I mean, there's references, there's long applications, you're writing stuff just to try to get this job. So, there's work expended that I'll never get back, and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But I mean, that's true for other fields as well. This is not unique to music, but that sense of, okay, I'm free. Yeah, that didn't work out. I'm free to do what I want to do.
Right.
And by then I'm 40 years old. It's like, well, I could invest in this, try to get a full-time university position till I get my job applications in. After a few years, I get a job, I get into tenure, but till that happens, I'm 50 years old. I don't know. I would rather spend my 40s doing things that feed me, that reward me, that bring quality of life. Mm-hmm. And that's, I mean, I'm very fortunate. Like, it involves a lot of chances to be with my family, a lot of opportunity to do what I love to do without, I mean, there are separations. I've done music camps alone, and that's not easy, being away from the family for 10 days, and it's not ideal, and I hope to not do it much anymore. Kind of was a thing with school and that sort of thing, but really I have a job that for me and my situation of life is really amazing. Being able to work from home. I'm doing, I mentioned the hymnal project earlier, but I have a few composition students that I meet with. It varies, throughout the year. I have people who send me things, and I do screencast reviews of their work. I have some who meet live for Zoom lessons. I have, just a little range of things there. Not a lot. I enjoy it. But every chance I get to compose, that's really what I want to be doing.
Nice, yeah. Well, this is actually maybe a good chance to switch a little bit just into your process of composing and what that looks for you. So would you be able to describe your process of composing, meaning when you either get a commission or come up with an idea that you want to do for yourself? What are some of the steps that are needed to get to the final product?
So I'm primarily a vocal and choral composer. It's the tradition that formed me. It's what I'm best at. And I mean, that was one of the things that came through, in the last year at university. I had a supervisor who helped me understand kind of what my core was. What is my core strength? What is the area from which I do the best work? Mm-hmm. And so that was very helpful. I was glad to get that. So, but I mean, if you're working with a piece for voice, whether it's solo voice or choir or whatever, the primary motivation is the text. So that organizes it. You look at a poem or you look at a psalm or a scripture and you say, how can this organize? And if it's a large scale work, I will sometimes map it out, on paper. I'm more likely to work with, colored pencil crayons in this part of the stage, put out a big piece of paper in front of me and draw a timeline and then, put in this text can be here and it'll have musical material like here. And it might be things like key relationships. It might be things like themes or prevailing tonality, modality of major, minor, modal, various things. Kind of looking at how will this text, what is the significant climax in the piece, and one thing that one technique is to actually compose the climax first.
Okay.
So, the part of the piece that is the most expressive, the most dense, the thickest texture, the loudest, or whatever. I mean, there's different ways of thinking about a climax, and not all of them are that cliche, but generally that's where it is. I mean, you expect the climax about 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through the work. It's probably going to have one of the highest notes. It might be the loudest. It might be orchestral tutti, everybody's playing, or whatever. But you have this kind of this goal, and then compose backwards. I mean, not literally backwards, note for note, but to unpack it, from a position of density toward the front to less density, so that's how you get the build. So you don't build. I mean, there are different ways that you can do this, but I mean, you can just start with kind of something really simple and let it get more complex, but it tends to get complex a little too fast.
Okay.
So sometimes, pulling it backward, kind of extracting backwards, is something that works there. I mentioned the thing of entering music in a MIDI file or, keyboard. That has been a helpful start for me, just to get, and often it'll just be 2 or 3 chords or some little motive that I feel is significant in some way. And then that becomes like the germ that I exploit in small and large scales throughout a work. The commission that I just did on the Rossetti text, it was just 2 verses, and it was metered poetry. It had, I think, 16 lines, 8 lines in each verse, not long lines, so it wasn't a lot of text. So I decided it's going to be strophic, in that the first and second verses will have pretty much the same musical material in some way. But anyway, often imposing a limitation is the way to start. And this is true for other arts as well. It's not just true for music. It's just true for any number of things, where imposing some sort of limitation on your work actually enhances your creativity. Yeah. So what I did for this one is, I had been doing this noodling for some, I have a piano at home, and sometimes I just sit on it and noodle about.
Does that mean you just play stuff?
Yeah, just kind of play stuff. And I had this kind of fun kind of thing I would do as a sort of kind of a, not really meditative exercise, but just a something that was kind of calming for me, would be to just to improvise on the black keys.
Oh, okay.
And, trying different things and different sounds. And you can get a major triad and a minor triad, but you often get some quartal harmony and things that are a little more unusual if you play on the black keys. And then I would, just do some black keys and then just F major. Boom, boom, boom. And it's just this sort of like twist that turns on the lights, because it's completely different keys it doesn't use any black keys. And anyway, so that was kind of a fun little thing that I did at home. I decided I wanted a piece that would kind of work on this. So I actually started with doing the entire first verse as much as possible just using black keys. And it's very difficult. It's very, very challenging. So I would shift. So it's pentatonic in terms of five pitches. But I would shift what I could allow. So in solfege, you can have pentatonic, can be do, re, mi, sol, la. That's in technical terms, the anhemitonic pentatonic scale, because an meaning none, and hemi meaning half, and tonic meaning tone. So no half step pentatonic scale.
Okay.
So that's the scale that the black keys are in.
Okay.
And it's the scale that most wind chimes are tuned to, so that when you have a wind chime, which is random, you'll never have a half step interval.
Oh,
It'll be a whole step at the smallest.
Right.
So the anhemitonic pentatonic scale. So do, re, mi, sol, la qualifies for that. But there are 2 others. You can also have so, ti, re. Sol, la, ti, re, mi. And you can have fa, sol, la, do, re.
Okay.
And so I allowed myself throughout sometimes to shift to those. So I could get new solfege pitches, but I never had more than 5 in one area. So that was kind of the limitation I put on that piece. And it brought out some sounds that for me were new, were good. I was happy with them just by kind of putting a limitation in that way. And then being free to break them. By the time the ending came, I had, the piece had kind of come together, and I had some tritone modulations, which happened from playing black keys and then F major. So you're going from like B to F kind of sounds. B has, I guess F sharp would be a better way to look at it, and then sort of white keys as key of C. But anyway, there is a tritone relationship between the verses. That's not important. What is important is that I got to the ending then. I got to the climax, and it's, the best part of the work, and loud, and sopranos are at their highest note, and then when you have all that energy, you have to, or you don't have to, but it always is important to me to let it kind of simmer down to the end. One of the characteristics of my work is that I do not like loud and high endings.
Okay.
You will rarely find a choral arrangement or a composition of mine that ends with soprano, higher than C, C5, third space of treble clef, and it'll almost. I mean, it's almost a. It's not a trademark because lots of people do this, but endings that are quiet and low just feel right to me. They feel like the kind. I mean, again, cliche can come back here a little bit trite, but still, it has to do with the dissipation of energy. So you have all that energy, and then you just quit there. It also has to do with, though, our culture of in the conservative Anabaptism of not applauding at concerts. So there's it just can get pretty awkward when you have this like grand choral work that ends with this triumphant fanfare, and it's loud, and sopranos on a high A, and it's done, and then it's just like people cough.
That's so true. Yeah.
Snicker. I mean, they don't snicker. Sorry, they just like wiggle and their feet slide and
so you try to make it where silence sounds good at the end of a
right.
At the end
exactly.
Of a piece.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that I think about that when I compose, but it does. It does affect me, and this is an example of culture affecting composition.
Yeah.
So it's if you have a piece that kind of ends out on a quiet note, the silence at the end just makes more cultural sense than if you go out triumphantly. I don't know how much that affects me. It may just be as well a product of being involved in too many youth and Bible school choirs, where we just don't quite have the technical skill to satisfactorily perform a high ending.
Okay.
And then it just sounds out of tune, or it's screechy, or, and let's face it. I mean, the fact is that most people in, conservative Anabaptist churches don't really like high soprano endings. I mean, I think I'm right about this.
Yeah, you probably are.
It's what that is just kind of where you start getting into highfalutin territory and that kind of thing. Anyway, all of that to say, in this last commission, it takes some time to dissipate that energy, for that energy from the climax to dissipate. And in that dissipation, it came to me how I wanted to do it, and it involved using more than 5 notes in an area, where the previous song, up to that point, any particular area could only have 5 different solfege syllables in a measure or whatever it was. The ending, they had 7 of them. And I don't care. I made the rule. I can break the rule. The rule helped me to find some sounds in the piece that I might not have found if I hadn't had that rule. But in the ending, I didn't care anymore. I knew how I wanted it to dissipate, and so I did.
Okay.
So being in control of the rules, I set them, I break them in terms of what, and by rules, I mean in positions that I place. Write a song that doesn't have any fas in it, or write a song that has half notes and eighth notes, but no quarter notes, or there's just any number of things. Write a piece where soprano doesn't go higher than E above middle C, and make it meaningful and substantive. And how are you going to do that? Because that's pretty hard to do. Those kinds of things.
Okay. Yeah. So, once you have gotten to that point, are you always listening to the piece? There are the little sections that you compose, and like, does it sound right, and tweaking a little bit? Is that how the process works?
Yeah. So that again comes back to the medium, the technology that I use to compose.
That we talked about before,
from working in notation software, or a MIDI sequencer, the urge to play back is so strong that I do it a lot. I mean, I know of, people who they don't work that way. They'll be composing and they'll putting it in notation, but they're not going to listen to it. They want to hear, they want to use their ear more. And I respect that. I aspire to that. But my workflow up to this point has been a lot of, and singing along. So it's very, very significant, for any, through, as soon as I have a section kind of fleshed out compositionally, I will sing through every part. I'll sing the soprano line, I'll sing the bass line as much as I can, and check it for horizontal congruence, because Western music is harmony centric, and we think a lot in terms of vertical, but sometimes forget the contrapuntal connections in the voice leading. So, singing along, modifying, that's where my tweaks come in, is, I'm singing a line and I'm like, this could be better. This particular line could be better. Well, how does that affect the harmony? If I change this note, then maybe someone else has to give up something somewhere else. And
then doesn't that change their horizontal?
It does change their horizontal line, and it will sometimes improve it, and it sometimes won't. But, that's a little bit of kind of that process.
So how do you decide when it's good enough?
So I use this works a lot of the time, but not all the time. Let's take it in terms of a hymn. So a hymn is one of the hardest things to compose, actually. I mean, besides like a really good fugue. But in terms of common practice, Western choral genre, a hymn is really difficult because it requires great economy of technique, of information, because it's so short.
Okay.
So the shorter things are harder to compose than the longer things, because the longer things you can be a little more sloppy about, teasing out a phrase, a harmonic progression. You have more room to explore alternate keys, spaces, longer modulations. There's just not, but when you compose a hymn in short meter, long meter, common meter, you're working with 25 syllables of text.
Yeah.
Like that's what you've got. And in this, you have to, the Western process in music is dialectic. It's a conversational. There's places you go and then you return in terms of the tonic function, dominant function, and where things go and where they come. And you don't have to do this. I mean, there's certainly some contemporary hymnody that departs from that, and that's fun to do too. But in terms of what makes the most sense for the singer, what makes the most sense for the audience, often has to do with this. Well, you have to be very economical in a hymn. You have to kind of tidy it in. So I find that working with a hymn, I spend like a lot of time on like just two little parts of it, like that just don't quite fit. They just don't quite work. And how do you know? Well, you don't always. I mean, this is intuition applies here, but right now, I think, well, not right now, but this is actually true. This is interesting. This is true in terms of even architecture. Like I mentioned, drawing prints for our house renovation. This was true there. So I had a lot of restrictions when we did our house renovation. We had restrictions of the existing building. Knew I was going to take the carport off and build a garage and a second floor, but restrictions of property line, restrictions of where the stairway was that we were going to use because it was over the basement stairway, pre-existing. Yeah. The stairs weren't there, but the basement stairs were there, and it had to go over them, or we would waste space. So where the stairs were, where the property lines were, what the setbacks were on the first floor compared to the second floor, because in Waterloo they're different. So I had to set back the top floor in a little bit if I wanted to get maximized garage space beneath it. All of these things were restrictions that kind of cramped what could happen and couldn't happen. And so I would work on a floor plan, and I would work on it, and I would erase, and I would work on it, and here's the kitchen, and now the kitchen's here, and now this is there, and then you get to this place where you just know it's right, where all of the little variables that come to play, that come to bear on this particular situation, all of these little variables, they fit. Mm-hmm. All the answers are checked off, and it's beautiful, and then you quit. And this happens for me in music as well. Like I'll be working on this bar and like there's different variables and I need this to get to here, and but this line needs to do this, and then it might be at night, you're lying in bed thinking about it. It might be, while you're working on it, you think of something and you change it, and then it's right, and then you quit. And this is what I call the Bucky moment for me, and that comes from the American. He was an architect, inventor, author, R. Buckminster Fuller.
Okay.
Mathematician. And he was the inventor of the geodesic dome, which is the kind of house that's like a dome, but a bunch of little shapes that kind of fit into to make a dome that doesn't need any support.
Oh, okay.
It's basically like half a soccer ball kind of thing.
Okay.
And there is an organic compound named after him. The buck. I should know what it is.
Buckyball.
Buckyball.
Yeah, I've heard of
the
that,
buckyball.
yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay.
So Buckminster Fuller, he has a lot of quotations attributed to him, but the one that has informed me the most, and I'll paraphrase here, and it's not quite true for my process, but it's true enough. He says, when I'm working on a problem, I never think about beauty.
Okay.
But when I have finished, if the solution is not beautiful, then I know it is wrong.
Interesting. Yeah.
So the difference for me is that I do think about beauty when I compose.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as abstract and as cerebral as a math problem might be. But it's also true that if I get to, if I'm working on a measure and if the solution is not beautiful, then I know it is wrong. Like there's different ways this could go. How do you know what's beautiful? But there's a way that you're like, that's right. This is how it should be, and then ideally, anytime I have a commission or a composition or an arrangement, ideally, when I say I'm finished, when I say this is the product, every measure in there, should be a Bucky measure. It should be beautiful. Okay. But that's not always true. Sometimes I just don't get it, or sometimes I think I have it, but I'm not sure, and then I try something out with a choir, Bible school, or something, and then I return to it, and I'm like, no, that was the wrong feel there. That was the wrong image. I didn't do it. I can do better.
Okay.
And then return to it. So even the Bucky moments sometimes fail. But and I present that less as something to which I aspire and more just a testimony of something that happens to me, is that I'm working on something and then something moves a little bit, something shifts. There's a little bit of a different angle that comes to it, and then it's right, and I know I'm done. And that's a pretty good feeling.
Yeah. Very good. Does it ever happen then that someone else will offer a critique or something that shows you that it wasn't quite complete, or is it usually pretty good by the time you have that feeling?
People aren't really critiquers very much. So that would depend on to whom I subject myself for criticism.
Okay. Yeah.
And so
if you commission a piece for someone, they usually don't say, I didn't like that part, or
they will sometimes have questions about things. Yeah, sometimes that will happen. That might be then more in terms of taste or in terms of audience sensibilities, things like that.
Yeah, okay.
And I will capitulate for sake of the commissioner or the commissioning organization. But there are multiple ways, sometimes that you can come out beautiful. And so sometimes having that kind of feedback helps me to organize a different way of making something beautiful.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Are most of the compositions that you do for others, or do you do compositions just to see what you can do, or just for your own?
Mostly for others. There's a reason. It's not a coincidence that many of the great choral arrangers are choir directors, and it's a pragmatic one. they want a song for their choir and there's not an arrangement of it, or the arrangement doesn't suit them because it doesn't match their choir. The range is too high, or the rhythms are too complicated, or it's too simple, or whatever. And so they make their own arrangement. So I did more arranging when I was more in choirs. I'm not in them as much anymore. So, now it's a little more commissions and Bible school choir, Calvary Bible School. Definitely in the last 5 years, I've done more arranging for that organization specifically than any other.
Okay.
Because that's who I'm working with over extended time.
When you think back to, or when you read about composers that we all hear about now, were they doing compositions for others, like that they were being commissioned and things like that, like take Bach or Beethoven or that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you go back to Bach and even up to Haydn, you have composers in the Western tradition working for patrons.
Okay.
So aristocrats who would hire them to be in their court. So Haydn was in the court of Esterhazy for most of his career, I think. It isn't till, and even Mozart, he was a little more, but it's Beethoven who is the freelancer more.
Okay.
The freelancer, not entirely. So yeah, it varies. You see it through the history of Western music shifting in terms of what are the political trends of the time, and ecclesiastical as well, trends of the church. So or even partly Bach, but pre-Bach as well. So Palestrina, writing for the church.
Okay.
So their patron is either the church or aristocrat of some kind, and then that shifts a lot in the 18th century, for sure.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. I don't know how much you have to say here, if you have anything to say on it, but do you have maybe some simple advice to give to an aspiring composer? So maybe someone that's just trying to get into composing, maybe for fun or something like that.
Sure. So the thing that I found, so my education, the most significant part of my education didn't happen at university, it happened in church.
Okay.
So this was listening to hymns in the common practice style from before I was born and now all my life. So that formation, that forms my sensibilities, the way I think about music, the way that I respond to harmonies and melodies and rhythms and those sorts of things. Well, the prevailing, now this depends too on which hymnal you're using. If you grew up on the church hymnal, or if you grew up on the Christian hymnal, or if you grew up on the church and Sunday school hymnal, or if you grew up on the Mennonite hymnal, this is going to have some effect on your sensibilities. But what I've found is that in general, the music that formed me, the music of my formation, was primarily homophonic, strophic hymns. So by homophonic, meaning that there's multiple parts but singing the words at the same time.
Right.
And strophic, meaning the verses are the same as each other.
Okay.
It's not through composed, like a song like Praise God from Whom, 606, the Mennonite anthem, right. Which is through composed. So that's an unusual one. That's an outlier, both in its through composition, but also in its texture, because that one is toward polyphony. It's a little more polyphonic, a little more like, the section of Hallelujah by Handel, and he shall reign, and which is fugal. That's actually a pretty textbook 18th century fugue that Handel sticks into the middle of Hallelujah.
Okay.
It's not developed as a fugue, but it follows the rules of it. So, sorry, where was I going with this?
You were talking about what's the church music you listen to.
Thank you. Yeah. So the music that we listen to. So I was not formed by a lot of polyphony music, where this line, probably the most polyphony I had growing up was singing canons in school.
Around, basically.
Around, yes. Yeah, singing in rounds, which is a good thing to do. But in terms of, polyphony, very little. So what that ends up doing, a lifetime of immersion or a lifetime in a childhood anyway. I mean, Mahler says that about composition, that composition, as an adult is actually just building blocks. And these blocks are all the things that we have gathered as a child.
Okay.
Right.
Interesting.
So if we talk about, the formative years of, first 10, 15 years of your life. And so this gives you sensibilities in the vertical sense, vertical harmonies and also chord to chord, but it does not give you a good sense of horizontal lines and note against note. Which we would call counterpoint, the contrapuntal aspects. And the contrapuntal aspects are in our music, but when you're in four parts, it blurs them.
Meaning we don't think about them when we sing them, or
and because some of the parts, by nature of their being four, have to be kind of boring.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Like,
okay.
You think about tenor lines and alto lines especially, and sometimes bass lines that really do not hold up to the rigor of a melody in terms of their interest and their emotive power and that sort of thing. And we're just used to that. We expect that. That's the norm, but music was not always that way. Music of the Renaissance, where, the bass line or the alto line could be just as interesting, just as emotive, just as expressive and leapy and characteristic of a melody. And so we've lost some of that. And so I would say to aspiring composers, and I hear this so often. Krzysztof Penderecki, the Polish composer, just passed away earlier this year. At his peak, one of the most successful contemporary Western composers, was at University of Toronto in about 2010-ish for a public lecture, and talked about how he studied counterpoint for 7 years. And I knew I took like 2 classes on it at university, right?
Yeah.
And, and that kind of stuck with me. You think about Shostakovich, who loved Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier, the Preludes and Fugues, and kind of did his own homage tribute to Bach. But is told, I don't know, I need to verify this, that he wrote a little fugue every morning before breakfast. And a fugue is kind of the epitome of common practice counterpoint.
Okay.
And so the contrapuntal interactions there. And so aspiring composers should study counterpoint. You can do it, on your own online. Look up species counterpoint, 16th century counterpoint. And do note against note in 2 voices. There's 5 species by Johann Fuchs' book Gradus ad Parnassum, which sounds fancy. It's because he wrote it in Latin, but it's translated into English. You can get it for $20 or less. Buy a counterpoint textbook, study counterpoint, and it informs so much of the Western sensibilities that and I feel that it is the single most needed supplement for somebody whose formation is like mine, that is growing up on hymns. So, because though the sensibilities of counterpoint are latent and inherent in the hymns that we sing, they're not obvious because of the 4 voices. Counterpoint. The most transparent counterpoint is 2 voices.
Okay.
Where it's note against note, and you can do it in 3 and 4 voices as well, but it doesn't have the same kind of pedagogical power as studying the 2-voice counterpoint in the 16th century style, first of all, and then eventually 18th century, which is the fugal counterpoint. So that's what I say, and this is, again, I'm talking to aspiring composers who've had a similar formation as I've had.
Yeah.
So this may not necessarily, but even thinking in terms of pop music or general music of the West of the 20th century and popular culture is still highly informed by the sensibilities of the common practice, and is still strophic and homophonic. Country music, pop music, or rap music. There's still that. Probably not so much for hip hop, but in terms of harmony as much, but it's still there. Okay. And definitely, jazz or rhythm and blues, and there's still that very similar kind of way of thinking about music. I should probably say, I mean, jazz is much more sophisticated than than my formation was, so that might be a little different category. But it's still that kind of homophony that we fail sometimes to explore adequately what's going on a horizontal basis.
Okay. So you mentioned doing some study and some things that you could study with that, but does it come from practice as well?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where, you mentioned if I want to promote anything, hiring somebody to at least look at your work and critique it. That's something that I've done for various students in counterpoint studies and some I've done counterpoint, with live Zoom lessons, some just screencasts. So I get them to buy a textbook and they do some work in First Species. They send me a file, I review it, do a screencast, send them a video link, and they can, at their time and leisure, they can review that and go on to the next species and so forth. But yeah, I mean, you can do it. There's a lot online in terms of species counterpoint that you can do alone. Alan Belkin is a Canadian composer who has a decent YouTube channel that involves a lot of this. There's certainly no shortage of resources, but you have to do it. You actually have to do it, and and it's most beneficial if you can have someone critique it.
Okay. Are you looking to do more critiquing? Like, do you want to give a contact information if anyone listening would want to go into that? Or are you kind of full right now?
I mean, I'm not looking for lots of it. If it's something that someone's interested in, I don't mind doing that. Email is wendell@wendellglick.com. That's just about the only thing that gets to me.
Okay.
I have a phone, not a cell phone, but I guess the phone would ring. But no, yeah, I don't mind being contacted.
Okay, I'll put your email address in the notes anyway if someone wants to, but
sure.
I'm not going to guarantee anything. But
no, yeah, I'm not looking for lots of it, but I'm certainly open to some.
Is composing music difficult?
Well, it depends on what you for me. I can speak for myself. Composing music is difficult when I try to compare myself with some standard that isn't me, and then tend to kind of write things to an ideal that is an ideal created on a path that is not mine. So I experienced this definitely when working on my dissertation, where but this started definitely as an undergrad, so I'm in school. I'm a second year student at Laurier. In the upper class, people were making these compositions where you stack blocks on a piano and you play some piano, but you knock the blocks over too, and they fall on the strings, and different things happen, and just a little bit of absurdity, actually. I mean, that's absurdity has been a part of the art aesthetic in the last 50 years, certainly, and that's not finished yet. And so I'm like, well, that I don't know. I'm just I'm just me, little Amish Mennonite boy, trying to make pretty stuff, and feeling I had a real kind of crisis of identity in that regard. Like, who am I? What am I doing?
Okay, interesting.
And then trying to compose things. Basically, one mistake we can make is that when there are things we don't understand about the way someone else does something, we compensate for it with complexity. That's not really the way to do it. You compensate for it by being trained the way they were trained, by growing up in their environment. And you can't do that.
No, you can't.
You can't do that. And so there's an aspect of congruence as a composer. Being true to yourself is to understand how you were formed, aspects of your formation, what brought you to where you are today, what are you good at, and expand it. By all means, expand it. I spent when I was at U of T, so I did 2 years there. I did no choral vocal music there. I did a commission on the side, but it wasn't related to my studies. It was an intentional decision that I am not good at certain things, so I'm going to do them, right? And so I wrote some music there that definitely doesn't reflect my core, but it was good that I did it, because here's what happens, Roland, when you push the kind of the edge of what you can do, when you compose in an area that you're not comfortable, you might never get good at it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not a bad orchestrator. I'm not great at it. It's not orchestration so much. It would be more to do with more abstractions, a little more, less concrete music, much more aleatoric, a little more random sounding, more florid, using, nested tuplets and rhythms that may or may not align at certain places, So there's some beauty in that music. I'm not critical of it. Or even studying serial music, the atonal, high modern music of the 1940s and 1950s, and there's benefit for any composer to the word that comes to mind is dabble, but that's a little dysphomistic. Like, it's not, I mean it in a good way, okay. Not just like, but to explore, things beyond your edge. What took me years to figure out is that the purpose of doing that is not necessarily to be good at that. The purpose of doing that is that when you return to your core, it will inform your core and it will make it better.
Oh, okay.
So you will have more flexibility. You will have more nuance. You will have more subtlety. You will have more variety. You have more sophistication. You will just have a wider palette of tools. You'll have more tools in your shop. If you spend some time doing some aleatoric music, if you spend some time doing some serial music, if you spend some time in transformation theory, if you spend some time in aspects of music that only relate tangentially to the music that forms you, then when you return to your strength, when you come back to what you're good at, you come back better, you come back stronger. And so for being a composer, for what was hard for me was learning that. It took me years to learn that. And now that I can, and to trust it, actually, to trust that, when I'm composing music in the academy, in an academic setting, that is strongly informed by 4-part a cappella harmonies, that it's actually good, that it's okay to do that. That even though just about nobody else is doing it in that way, they have different formations, they have different paths, they have different ways of approaching things, and it's okay to be true to what is my strength. Mm-hmm. And so the hard part, I guess, is trusting that.
Yeah.
Because I see it in aspiring composers, is just an overcompensation by just trying to make things more complex, just throw in more parts, just just make it messier than it needs to be. And I've been informed a lot. I've been inspired a lot, and some informed by it. Mid to late 20th century minimalism, particularly music of Arvo Pärt, Goretzky, Taverner, and some of the American minimalists, Steve Reich, John Adams, and more. In terms of that, less is more. So pulling back is actually a strength. And that was a feature I was already working on in the 4th year of undergrad, in that composition of Menno Simons, which involves a timpani ostinato pattern in 7/4 that repeats about 180 times, I think.
I think I remember that part of it, yeah.
So, that kind of pulling back. So trusting that has been difficult. So that's almost more difficult than the composing part itself. Is the self-doubt and the questions that plague you, like, am I an imposter? Is this good enough?
Yeah.
And those are questions that will affect any artist or any person doing any job, depending on their personality, or whether or not your level of narcissism, or your level of nihilism, or whatever kind of ism that you might be afflicted
I've
with.
even felt that with starting this project.
Sure.
Like, why am I putting podcast episodes out there? Who's going to listen? That kind of thing. So I think a lot of people can probably identify with that, especially in an art form.
Sure.
Yeah. I have we are almost at the 2-hour mark, so I'm gonna probably wrap it up pretty soon. But I will ask you if there's anything else that you want to talk about or mention before we close it out. But I do have one question yet, and that's a definition of a term that you've used a few times, and you maybe did kind of define it, but just maybe a more succinct definition. You've used the term fugue. Am I saying that correctly? So what is that exactly?
So a fugue is I mean, it's a style. It can be fugal as a style. It can also be used as a particular type of composition. It's a form as well. So a fugue, as we understand, is going to be it can be 2 voices, it can be 4, it can be 5, but generally it's going to be staggered entrances with in the 18th century style, very specific or fairly specific with some variations in terms of the key relationships. So you might have for let's go to Messiah and the Hallelujah. Or I mean, there's fugal writing all throughout, but when tenor comes in, da 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 da, no, that's the basses, da 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 da, and then tenor da 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 da. I'm not in the right key, but they come in the key of the dominant. So bass comes in the key of the tonic with a theme, a subject, and then tenor comes in with the same subject but in the key of the dominant, while bass does a counter subject.
Okay.
And then I believe it's alto that comes in with the subject. Tenor gets the counter subject. Well, tenors is technically called an answer, but that doesn't matter. It's the same as the subject, but it's in a different key, and so forth. And then finally, soprano comes in with the answer, And so the different ways these voices come in, the way they interact with each other. So you're dealing with subjects, answers, counter subjects. There are episodes of expositions, and then there's a development section where these ideas are explored more randomly, and it's basically taking a snippet like dun, 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 and breaking it up, putting it in different keys, doing it forward, doing it backward, doing it upside down and backward, transposing it, doing snippets of it, doing it in half the time, so it takes half as long, doing it in twice the time, so all the quarter notes become half notes. Just a whole range of ways of developing a single theme.
Okay.
So, but the point of it is how the voices work with each other and how they're developed. So when you talk about fugal writing, you're talking about staggered entrances, where everybody has the melody sometimes, and that goes throughout the Baroque and classical and Romantic and even 20th century literature, for sure. But, in Messiah, you have, and he shall purify, and then, and he shall purify, and he shall purify. They keep coming in all these layers. That is in the style of a fugue. So that is fugal writing, but the fugue itself as a form, as an 18th century art form, which peaked with Bach, the Well-Tempered Clavier, is kind of like Western music's greatest gift to humankind. In terms of the fugue, would definitely be Bach. He's unparalleled. Okay.
Yeah. Well, thanks for clarifying that for me. You'd used it a few times, and so I think I should actually know what you're talking about when you're talking about that there. Yeah. Is there anything else that you wanted to say for sure, or you?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think that that's nothing comes to mind right now. Nope. So.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing your story and some of what you've learned along the way. And we'll close it there.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. And thank you, Wendell, for sharing with us from your story and some of the things that you've learned along the way. I really enjoy the music that Wendell has composed. I think it's really a great thing what he and other composers are doing by providing the church and our community with new songs to sing, new songs to learn. If you've never heard any of Wendell's music, you definitely should go and check it out. We've included in the show notes on the website, everydayexpertise.ca, some links to some of the songs that he's composed. Two of my personal favorites are Out in the Fields with God and Oh Holy Angels Bright. So yes, definitely go and check out Wendell's music. If you want to connect with the show, you can find us on social media, and you could also send me an email at contact@everydayexpertise.ca. Thanks again for listening, and Tune in again next week to learn from the expertise of everyday people.